Coming up, fans' fury over the top flight football clubs accused of putting greed before the game.
The Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. Boris Johnson says he'll work with football authorities to block a new so-called European Super League. It's after 6 major English sides, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool and Spurs, reveal plans to sign up to a breakaway tournament, including some of the biggest teams in Europe. Well, the Prime Minister joins the FA, UEFA, former players and fans in condemning the move, which has been widely criticised as being based purely on the club's self-interest. Juliet Bremner reports on football's biggest clash yet. Well, Juliet, I mean, everyone seems to be against this plan, but what is likely to happen next?
Well, I'm saying, if you don't give us more money for taking part in your competition, then PR backlash. Fans, football players, everyone, as you say.
Yeah, thank you. Well, one of those clubs that has signed up to the new league, Tottenham, have sacked their manager, Jose Mourinho. Spurs are... An NHS trust has pleaded guilty for failing to provide safe care and treatment following the death of a baby boy. Harry Richford died 7 days after his emergency delivery at the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother Hospital in Margate in November 2017. An inquest had already found his death was wholly avoidable. Our reporter Sarah Saunders is at the court. Boris Johnson's planned visit to India next week has been cancelled following a huge spike in COVID cases in the country. The situation is now leading the government to consider adding it to the COVID travel red list, a decision ITV News understands to be likely. Well, concerns have been raised further because of a new variant that has emerged there. Our political reporter Shihab Khan is in Westminster this lunchtime. So Shihab, the PM's decision felt pretty inevitable, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Prime Minister's decision to cancel his trip, but notably the Indian variant as well. We'll talk now to Professor Danny Altman from Imperial College. Professor Altman, thanks for joining us this lunchtime. So the Prime Minister's cancelled his trip to India. We're hearing that India is likely to be added now to the government's travel red list. The question is, a lot of people are asking, why hasn't that happened already? This finger of suspicion, as you say, Professor Altman, would it not make sense just to act sooner and stop the flights immediately? Well, you know, we have seen an easing of restrictions, particularly in England as well, didn't we? Over the weekend, we saw a lot of people able to eat outside on the streets, a lot of people in parks as well. Still to come. But first to the United States and the trial of the former police officer accused of killing George Floyd by kneeling on his neck. Well, later today, the prosecution and defence will lay out their closing arguments, but there are already concerns this week could see violent protests reignited by the verdict. Well, in the past week, demonstrations have been held following the shooting of another black man, Dwante Wright, ahead of jury deliberations. George Floyd's aunt and cousin have been speaking exclusively to Noel Phillips of ITV. Good Morning Britain. Angela Harrison ending Noel Phillips' report there. A charity says that stalkers have been taking advantage of lockdown restrictions to prey on their victims. The warning from the Susie Lamplugh Trust comes as police record a huge rise in the number of stalking incidents. And is Suki Barker from the Susie Lamplugh Trust. Suki, thanks so much for talking to us this lunchtime. You know, these figures are incredibly worrying. It's just from London alone. But what is it about the pandemic that is essentially encouraging this kind of behaviour? To it, Suki, as well. Even just the fact that, you know, we're all meant to be wearing face masks, aren't we? And that is a factor too. Is one thing, but we heard the stats that we heard from London, they come from the Met Police, but of course this happens across the country. What can the police do if someone, you know, reports that they are being stalked? Do they have enough powers? And essentially, is there enough protection for victims out there? Now, NASA has successfully flown a small helicopter on Mars, and the space agency has promised there is more to come. And finally, back on Earth, but a journey just as significant. There were hugs, tears and joyful reunions in airports across Australia and New Zealand today as residents were able to travel freely between the two countries for the first time in more than a year. It is the first major travel bubble allowing people quarantine-free visits, something that could provide a template for the rest of the world. Sally Biddulph has the story. A reminder of our main story this lunchtime. Plans for a new so-called European Super League have been condemned by politicians, former players and fans. And that's it. Mary is back here with the ITV Evening News at 6:30. But from everyone on the lunchtime team, bye-bye. Hello again. Now the main stories in London. As you may have been hearing, new figures show that stalking has increased by more than 300% in London during lockdown. Police are appealing for witnesses after a teenager was stabbed in Tower Hamlets. The infrared body scanners and up to 19,000 CCTV cameras will be introduced to transport hubs and bus stops if Conservative candidate Sean Bailey is elected mayor. Mr Bailey. The UK's first community warball court has opened in Southwark. The new weather now. Here's Sally. And that's it for now. We're back at 6. Until then, enjoy your afternoon. Bye-bye.